What would you do if the very people meant to keep your neighborhood beautiful started making your life a living hell? When I moved into Sunset Pines, I thought I had found the perfect place. A quiet, picturesque neighborhood where every lawn was neatly trimmed, every house matched in shades of beige, white, or gray, and everything felt orderly. The HOA took great pride in maintaining this uniformity, and honestly, at first, I didn't mind. I figured having a homeowners association would mean fewer headaches, no messy yards, no abandoned cars on the street, no clashing colors ruining the look of the place. That was before I learned the truth. The HOA wasn't about keeping things clean. It was about control. I bought my house knowing it needed work. The exterior paint was peeling, faded, and an eyesore compared to the pristine homes around it. Wanting to follow the rules, I did everything by the book. I submitted an official request to repaint, listing a soft, warm beige as my color choice, something that blended seamlessly with the rest of the neighborhood. The HOA approved it. I had the letter. The board had signed off. Everything was documented. So why, the moment my painters started their work, did I find Marge Reynolds, the HOA president, marching up my driveway like she was about to shut down an illegal operation? She wasn't alone. 2 board members flanked her, clipboards in hand, faces tight with disapproval. Marge, a woman who exuded authority like she had been born for bureaucracy, stopped just short of the half-painted wall, hands on her hips, her expression sharp enough to slice through concrete. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice clipped and stern. "What do you think you're doing?" I blinked at her, confused. "Painting my house. Just like I said in my request. The one you approved." Marge scoffed, pulling out her phone and snapping a picture like she was gathering evidence for a crime scene. "That color is not compliant with neighborhood guidelines." For a second, I thought she had to be joking. "It's literally on the approved list," I said, my frustration bubbling up. "You signed off on it." "I have the letter." She exchanged a glance with Frank Holloway, the short, balding board member who seemed to thrive on making people miserable. He cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "We don't recall approving this particular shade." I could feel my pulse spike. "You don't recall?" I pulled out my phone, scrolled through my emails, and held up the exact message from the HOA, complete with signatures. "This is your approval. Right here." Marge didn't even glance at the screen. Her lips pressed into a tight smile, her eyes cold and calculating. "Regardless, the board reserves the right to review decisions and make adjustments where necessary." "That's not how contracts work," I shot back, my patience wearing dangerously thin. Frank coughed again, shifting his weight. "Unfortunately, this is a matter that will need to be discussed in an official HOA meeting." That was when I knew. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. They were setting me up. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I sat at my desk, poring over every piece of documentation I had, the approval email, the HOA's own guidelines, photos of houses painted in nearly identical shades. It was all there, black and white, proof that I had done nothing wrong. But as I stared at the neatly worded letter on my screen, the truth settled in like a weight on my chest. This wasn't about paint. This was about power. The next morning, the official violation notice landed in my inbox like a slap to the face. In bold, impersonal text, the HOA informed me that my home was now in violation of community standards and that I had exactly 1 week to repaint it to an approved color or face, escalating fines, starting at $500 per day. I read it twice, then 3 times, my disbelief curdling into something darker. They had approved the color. They had signed off on it. And now they were fining me for their own decision. I wasted no time drafting a response, attaching every piece of evidence I had. I kept my tone professional but firm, making one point crystal clear: if the HOA was going to enforce this rule, they would need to apply it equally to every other home that had the same shade of beige. If they couldn't justify that, then they had no right to single me out. The reply came quicker than I expected, a curt message stating that the matter would be addressed in the next HOA meeting and that I should prepare to present my case. Present my case? Like I was on trial? Frustration burned in my chest, but I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't backing down. If they wanted to play games, I'd make sure they regretted it. That afternoon, I walked outside to find Marge Reynolds standing in my neighbor's yard, speaking in hushed tones with an older couple. They glanced in my direction, and Marge gave me a tight, knowing smile before continuing her conversation. Within days, the change was impossible to ignore. The friendly waves from neighbors stopped. People who had been perfectly warm and chatty before now averted their eyes when I walked by. A few even crossed the street to avoid me. At first, I thought I was imagining things, until one of the younger homeowners, a guy named Kyle, stopped me outside my mailbox and muttered, "Hey, man, I don't know what you did to piss off Marge, but she's telling people you're trying to push for looser HOA rules. That you want to open the floodgates for people to paint their houses neon colors and ruin the neighborhood." I stared at him. "That's ridiculous. You know that's not true." He sighed. "Yeah, but not everyone cares about the truth. They just don't want to be on her bad side." He lowered his voice. "Be careful. She's making an example out of you." I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to storm down the street and confront Marge right then and there. She wasn't just fining me, she was turning the entire neighborhood against me. When the HOA meeting finally arrived, I was ready. I walked into the community center armed with every document, every email, every shred of evidence proving my case. The room was filled with homeowners, but the atmosphere was tense, quiet in a way that didn't feel right. Marge sat at the front of the room, flanked by Frank Holloway and Judy Lawson, both holding their ever-present clipboards like they were preparing to deliver a verdict. "Let's begin," Marge announced smoothly, folding her hands in front of her. "We are here to review the issue regarding Mr. Carter's non-compliant paint color." I took a steady breath and laid out my argument, keeping my tone measured and clear. I walked them through the step-by-step approval process, the signed-off request, the identical colors on other houses, and most importantly, the fact that they had broken their own rules by retroactively changing a decision. By the time I finished, I could see a few homeowners exchanging uneasy glances. Some even nodded slightly. They knew I was right. They knew this wasn't about a paint color. Marge's face remained unreadable, but I noticed the subtle tightening of her jaw. Frank cleared his throat, shifting in his chair. "Well, unfortunately, Mr. Carter, while we appreciate your thorough documentation, the HOA reserves the right to adjust decisions based on the best interest of the community." Marge gave me that same condescending smile I had come to loathe. "With that in mind, the board will need to take this matter under further review before making a final decision." I exhaled sharply. I knew exactly what that meant. They weren't backing down. They were buying time. This fight wasn't over. I expected resistance. I expected the HOA to stall, to drag their feet, maybe even try to reinterpret their own rules. What I didn't expect was full-scale retaliation. 2 days after the meeting, I found a thick envelope in my mailbox. At first, I assumed it was another pointless HOA notice about the ongoing review of my case. Instead, it was something worse. A fine. Correction, multiple fines. I flipped through the pages, my irritation turning to disbelief. Excessive debris in yard, $250. Improper trash bin placement, $300. Unauthorized exterior modifications, $500. I walked outside, scanning my property, looking for whatever ridiculous excuse they had come up with. Nothing. My yard was pristine. My trash bins were exactly where they had always been. And that so-called unauthorized modification? It was the same decorative bench that had been on my porch for months. This wasn't about violations. This was punishment. I stormed back inside, taking photos of every inch of my property, making sure there wasn't a single blade of grass out of place. Then I sat down and drafted yet another email to the HOA, demanding explanations, attaching photographic proof that these fines were baseless. No response. The next morning, another letter arrived. A warning for aggressive behavior. A $1,000 fine attached. I stared at the notice, my pulse hammering in my ears. Aggressive behavior? When? Where? Then it hit me. That conversation with Marge in my driveway. I had raised my voice, sure. But I hadn't threatened her. I hadn't stepped toward her. Nothing about that interaction could remotely be considered aggressive. Unless, of course, you were trying to manufacture a reason to keep someone in check. I had expected dirty tactics, but this was calculated, intentional. They were trying to wear me down, drown me in fines until I either gave up or left. And then, just when I thought they couldn't get any more blatant, I noticed something that sent my frustration boiling into outright fury. 3 houses down, a home had just been freshly painted. In the exact same shade of beige I had been denied. I walked up the driveway, knocking on the door. The homeowner, a woman in her 50s, answered with a cautious smile. "Hey, sorry to bother you," I started, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. "I just noticed your new paint job looks really nice. Did you have any trouble with the HOA approving the color?" She shook her head. "Oh, no. It was super easy. I just submitted the request last month, and they got back to me within a couple of days. Approved right away." A couple of days. I forced a smile. "That's great. Have you had any issues with the board? Like, fines or notices?" She blinked at me, confused. "No. Why?" I already knew the answer before I asked the next question. "Are you friends with Marge?" Her smile flickered, just slightly. "Well, I mean, I see her at the HOA meetings. We're not best friends or anything, but she's been nice." "Why?" I clenched my jaw, nodding. "No reason. Just curious." As I walked back to my house, my hands curled into fists. It was never about the paint. It was about control. Favoritism. Selective enforcement. They weren't even trying to hide it. I sat down at my desk and started compiling everything. Every fine. Every letter. Every email. I went back through old neighborhood newsletters, searching for patterns. I was done playing defense. It was time to go on the offensive. And then, as if sensing my defiance, the HOA delivered their next move. A final notice. Failure to comply with community standards would result in additional legal action. If fines remained unpaid, the HOA reserved the right to escalate to property liens and potential foreclosure. I let out a hollow laugh, shaking my head. They were actually trying to take my house over a paint color. That was the moment I knew, this wasn't just about me anymore. If they were willing to go this far to force one homeowner into submission, how many others had they bullied into silence? I wasn't going to be another one of their casualties. I was going to fight back. I wasn't the first person the HOA had done this to. That much became clear the moment I started talking to my neighbors. The difference? Most people hadn't fought back. I went door to door, casually bringing up the HOA. At first, people were hesitant to talk. They'd glance around, lower their voices, keep their answers vague, as if they were afraid Marge might be listening from the shadows. But the moment I told them what was happening to me, the bogus fines, the threats, the blatant favoritism, I saw something shift. They had stories too. The man across the street, Mr. Thompson, had been forced to replace his entire driveway last year because the HOA had suddenly decided the cracks in the concrete were a safety issue. A woman 2 houses down, Melissa, had been fined hundreds of dollars for a lawn ornament that was identical to one in Marge's own yard. And Kyle, the same guy who had warned me before? He had been hit with so many landscaping violations for his bushes not being properly shaped that he had finally paid a professional to come trim them every 2 weeks, just to avoid the harassment. Everyone had a story. Everyone had been bullied. But they had all done the same thing. They paid the fines. They complied. They stayed quiet. Because what else could they do? I didn't blame them. That was exactly what the HOA counted on, fear. So I took it a step further. I reached out to a local news outlet, one that had covered HOA corruption cases before. I sent them everything, the emails, the fines, the approval letter that the board had mysteriously lost. I even included the most damning piece of evidence, the fact that Marge's friend had been approved for the exact same paint color I was being fined for. It didn't take long for them to respond. 2 days later, a reporter called me. They were interested. They wanted to speak to other homeowners, gather more stories, expose how the HOA was operating. And they weren't the only ones. By the time the article went live, Homeowners Speak Out Against HOA Overreach in Sunset Pines, the entire neighborhood was talking. Marge tried to do damage control. She sent out a neighborhood-wide email, calling the article a misleading and exaggerated attack on the HOA's dedication to community standards. She claimed that outside influences were trying to stir up conflict and that the HOA had always acted in the best interest of Sunset Pines. But it was too late. People had seen the truth. A petition started circulating, one demanding that the HOA board be removed and replaced with new leadership. It started with just a few signatures. Then it turned into dozens. Then hundreds. By the end of the week, the entire neighborhood was demanding a vote. Marge wasn't just losing control, she was losing the war. The emergency HOA meeting was unlike anything Sunset Pines had ever seen. The community center, usually half empty during these gatherings, was packed wall to wall with homeowners who had finally had enough. People who had never dared to speak up before stood shoulder to shoulder, their frustration boiling over into something unstoppable. Marge sat at the front of the room, flanked by Frank and Judy, her expression tight but controlled. She still thought she had power. She still believed she could talk her way out of this. She started with the same carefully rehearsed speech, claiming the HOA had only ever acted in the best interest of the community, that recent misunderstandings had been blown out of proportion. But the moment she opened the floor for discussion, she lost control. One by one, homeowners stood up, not just to talk about me, but about years of mistreatment. Mr. Thompson called them out for forcing him to replace his driveway. Melissa demanded an explanation for why she was fined for a lawn ornament that Marge herself had in her yard. Kyle finally spoke up about how the board had weaponized landscaping violations to keep people in line. And then came the final blow. Someone, I still don't know who, had secretly recorded a private conversation between Marge and Frank, where they admitted to selectively enforcing rules to make an example out of certain homeowners. The moment that audio played, the entire room erupted. Marge tried to regain control, but it was too late. A vote was held. The entire HOA board was removed in a landslide defeat. By the end of the night, Marge walked out of the community center without a word. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't argue. She just left. The next few weeks changed everything. The new HOA leadership revoked the unfair fines, rewrote the vague, selectively enforced rules, and actually listened to homeowners instead of bullying them into compliance. And as for my house, it remained exactly as I had planned. The same color they had originally approved, the the same color they had tried to weaponize against me. This fight was never really about paint. It was about power. And in the end, the people who had abused it lost everything. Because the truth is, bullies don't expect people to fight back. They assume you'll cave, that you'll be too afraid to push back. But when you do, you show them that their power was never real to begin with. Have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.